Childhood is supposed to be a safe time. It is meant for learning, small mistakes, laughter, and slow growth. It is the time when dreams are formed and hope feels natural. But in some parts of the world, childhood ends before it truly begins. Not because of sickness, not because of war, but because fear enters the home before hope ever does. What happens when a child stops thinking about the future and starts thinking only about survival? What happens when school is replaced by silence and play is replaced by fear? How does a child become invisible to the world, yet useful to people who only see power? This is one of those stories. It is not told to shock you. It is not told to glorify violence. It is told to understand how power can become so cruel that even children are pulled into it. This is the story of a cartel that crossed one of the darkest lines imaginable. This is the story of Los Zetas. If you value true stories told with care and accuracy, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Narco Files. Here, we don't chase rumors or exaggeration. We focus on real events, real consequences, and the truths that are often left untold. Let's begin. Who Los Zetas really were. Los Zetas did not start like most criminal groups. They were not street gangs and they were not small smugglers trying to grow. Their story began inside the Mexican military. In the late 1990s, a group of highly trained soldiers left their positions and chose a criminal path instead. These men were part of elite military units and had deep training in combat, planning, and strict discipline. When they entered the criminal world, they brought this military mindset with them. At first, they worked as hired protection for the Gulf Cartel. Their role was to guard territory, enforce control, and scare away rivals. Over time, their influence grew and their loyalty changed. Eventually, they separated from the Gulf Cartel and formed their own organization. From that moment forward, the structure and level of violence in Mexico's criminal world began to shift in a serious way. A cartel built on fear, not silence. Most criminal groups try to stay hidden. They avoid attention and work quietly. Los Zetas believed something different. They believed fear worked better than secrecy. Instead of relying only on bribes or silent deals, they used open violence as a message. Every action was meant to warn others. Resistance was not allowed, and disobedience was meant to have consequences. Over time, this way of thinking turned violence into a deliberate tool, not just a result of crime. Fear became part of their strategy. As this fear spread, daily life in many communities began to break down. When people live in constant fear, normal rules fade away. That environment allowed Los Zetas to expand into areas where no cartel had ever held that level of control before. How children became part of the system. The idea of children being involved in organized crime feels hard to accept. Children are supposed to be protected. But Los Zetas did not see children that way. They saw them as useful. In many of the areas they controlled, poverty was common and real opportunities were rare. Some children lived in homes affected by migration, unemployment, or long-term violence. Schools often lacked resources, and protection from authorities was limited. Los Zetas took advantage of this reality. They knew children were easier to influence than adults. Children could be shaped, pressured, and frightened into following orders. Some were offered money or food as motivation. Others were told their families would stay safe if they cooperated. In many cases, fear was the strongest force. Once a child became involved, leaving was extremely difficult and for many, it felt impossible. The first step was never violence. Recruitment rarely began with extreme or violent actions. It usually started in quiet ways. A child might be asked to watch a street, pass along a message, or stand in one place for a short time. At first, these tasks seemed small and harmless. But over time, they created involvement. That involvement slowly turned into dependence, and dependence turned into control. By the time the situation became truly dangerous, the child was already trapped. Walking away no longer felt possible. Refusing orders could bring serious consequences, not only for the child, but sometimes for their family as well. This slow and careful process is what made the system so effective, and at the same time, so deeply cruel, turning obedience into a weapon. Los Zetas operated like a military unit. Orders were expected to be followed without questions. Discipline was strict and often enforced through fear. The same structure was used even with young recruits. Teenagers were taught to obey first and not think too much. Showing emotion was treated as weakness, and loyalty was presented as the only way to survive. Some children were taught how to handle weapons, while others were exposed to violence to make them less afraid of it. This was not done to protect them or teach real skills. It was meant to break their resistance and remove hesitation. When fear becomes part of daily life, moral limits slowly fade, and following orders starts to feel normal. The power of psychological control. The most powerful form of control was not physical force, it was psychological control. Children were slowly cut off from the outside world. They were told that the police could not be trusted and that society had already turned its back on them. Over time, the cartel became the only authority they knew and the only system they believed in. This isolation created a false sense of belonging. The cartel took the place of family, school, and community. Leaving did not feel like freedom. It felt like losing everything they had. For many children, staying felt safer than running away, even when staying meant living in constant danger. When the truth came out. For years, there were stories and rumors about children being involved with Los Zetas. Over time, these rumors were confirmed. Mexican authorities began arresting teenagers who were taking part in cartel activities. Official court records and statements showed that some of these children had been recruited at very young ages. These cases were not isolated. They were part of a larger, ongoing pattern. These discoveries shocked much of the public. But for the communities living under cartel control, it was something they had already suspected. In these areas, children were no longer automatically protected by their age. In cartel territory, being young did not guarantee safety. Everyone, even children, could be drawn into the violence. Why Los Zetas went further than others. Many criminal groups take advantage of young people, but Los Zetas did it on a much larger scale because of the way they were organized and the territories they controlled. They held large areas and were constantly under threat from rivals and authorities. When adults were arrested or killed, children were often used as replacements. This created a cycle where violence kept feeding itself. The more chaos there was, the easier it became to recruit new children. In this way, the system could continue, but it did so by taking away the future of an entire generation. The cost paid by the children. Very few children who became involved with Los Zetas were able to escape. Some lost their lives during conflicts, while others were arrested and had to face long legal processes. Even those who survived carried deep emotional wounds. Trauma does not simply go away with freedom. Trying to rebuild a normal life after these experiences is extremely difficult. Going back to school can feel impossible, and learning to trust others takes time. The impact of what they went through often stays with them long after the cartel itself is gone. Families living in silence. Families were often caught in the same trap as the children. Saying no to the cartel could bring violence, and even reporting recruitment could put their lives at risk. Many parents stayed silent, not because they agreed with what was happening, but because staying quiet was the only way to protect themselves and their loved ones. Entire communities had to learn to live with fear as a normal part of daily life. Homes grew quieter, streets became emptier, and childhood slowly disappeared without anyone noticing. This fear did not make headlines, but it left a lasting mark on everyone who lived under the cartel's control. The fall of Los Zetas. By the mid-2010s, Los Zetas began to fall apart. Internal conflicts, arrests, and the deaths of leaders weakened the group. Rival cartels took advantage, and the organization eventually split into smaller factions. But even as it collapsed, the damage remained. Communities were left with broken trust, lost generations, and the lasting impact of a childhood stolen by fear. What this story is really about. This story is not about monsters. It is about systems that fail. When governments cannot protect communities, other powers take control. When schools and education disappear, exploitation fills the gap. Children are not born violent. They are shaped by their surroundings. Understanding this truth is essential to prevent history from repeating itself and to protect future generations. Why accuracy matters more than shock. Stories about cartels are often exaggerated, but the truth is serious enough. Los Zetas did use children, authorities confirmed it, and survivors lived it. Accuracy matters because real lives were affected, and sensationalizing it would only cause more harm. A lesson the world should remember. Protecting children is not just about kindness. It is about keeping communities safe and strong. When children are unprotected, violence spreads quietly and deeply. This story is not just about one cartel or country. It is a warning of what can happen when fear takes the place of responsibility. The most tragic part of this story is not the violence itself. It is the silence that allowed it to grow. It is the moments when fear was stronger than voices, and when looking away felt safer than speaking up. When silence becomes normal, cruelty finds space to survive. How many children were lost before anyone paid attention? How many futures disappeared without ever being counted? One child lost is already too many. A generation lost is a failure we all share, no matter where we live. Childhood should never be a battlefield. It should never be shaped by fear or control. It should be protected, not used. Remembering these stories is not about the past alone. It is about what we choose to notice and what we refuse to ignore. If you believe these stories matter, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Narco Files. Your support helps keep real, accurate stories alive, told with care, respect, and responsibility. Thank you for watching.